like this with our bouncy bobs.
Yeah, be like, this is great.
Welcome to Welsh Wednesday.
Welcome to Welsh Wednesdays. Welcome to Welsh Wednesdays, where we, and that's me, Kiri, Pritchard-McLean, and Katie Gill-Williams, take a different subject to do with Wales, and we have a chat about it, and then we try and have another chat about it, sgwrs bach, in Welsh, because we are both Welsh learners. And this week, get ready to slide off your chairs, it's that sexy. It is. We're talking about the census. They started them in 1801, and they would happen every 10 years, and they largely have, and the exceptions being there wasn't one in 1941 because of the war, and in 1921 there wasn't one in Ireland, and then in 1966 they had an extra one, and I think that's to do with like post-war recovery, perhaps, because they're talking about this year, 2021, there is a census, and they're talking about, because of the old COVID-19, having another one in 2026.
I hope that 2026, did you say, for the next one, isn't like a benchmark for when we'll actually be out of lockdown. Like,
yeah,
it's sort of
it is a worry, isn't it, that they've picked something that's half a decade away to be like, hopefully we'll be over it by then, but like it doesn't sound very like confident, because you'd think, right, well, if you thought we were going to be over it, you just bump it to November, but they haven't. So I think that says an awful lot. There's a fine if you don't do it. Did you know that?
Well, yeah, no, only actually till the other day, and I was like, why do they have to monetize everything that I can do wrong? Like, if there's going to be a fine, I'll miss it and I'll be charged. Just find ways of just skinning me, really. But it's quite. Is it about £1,000, or am I being dramatic?
Yeah, it is. So the fine was introduced in 1920, and that was after there'd already been a boycott. Basically, in 1911, the suffragettes were pursuing, getting the vote. So what the suffragettes did was they went, oh no, you don't get to count us and use us as information for anything until you give us the vote, until you recognise us as citizens. So they were like, we're going to be a party that night. So they went and had all these amazing census parties. How good would that be? So many women getting off with each other there. It's just absolutely obvious. In the best way, not all going like all suffragettes are lesbians. If they were, that would make sense, because it explains why they're so well organised. 1 million people avoided a census in 1991, and it was because the poll tax was around, and they thought, and how the poll tax worked was you basically were paid a tax on how many people lived in the house. So, families, families with lots of kids would be frinced, yet incredibly rich people with only one son or daughter wouldn't get taxed as much. So they were just like, right, we're going on the dodge because we're worried that they're using this information to tax us more. So loads of people kind of went missing that night, like kept on the move basically. So yeah, they think 1 million people avoided it because they're worried about the implications in terms of their tax. They couldn't afford it.
That's like when you've got council tax, or you move back in with your mum after uni and they don't declare it because it'll go back up. So you're just this wandering soul that has no place of residence for a bit after uni.
That the census evolves is a positive sign, even under Conservative governments. So in 1851, they used to ask you, they started asking people about their religion. So they started gathering more information. And there would be a separate form where you could fill in all the details to do with your origin, and then in 2007 it got amalgamated into the main thing, but they deliberately don't want it to be too long. So there was a bit I was reading that's like, so we'll talk about what's been added recently, but there was a bit that was reading that was said, for instance, in 1991 we stopped asking people if they had an indoor toilet or not. Which I thought was like,
what would you get charged for that? I was thinking, if I worked for the census, I'd just try and sneak in a question, like asking something ridiculous about the colour of your pubes or something. Just see if you slip that question in.
So they have changed it a little bit. So there's a question that asks you your sex, and you can only pick male or female from that. And then there's an additional question which is voluntary, which I think is important, which says, is your gender identity the same as your or sex? Does it align with what you were assigned at birth, basically? And I think you can say yes, no. And so yeah, that's a voluntary question, and it's only asked to those over 16. So obviously it's not giving us a very comprehensive view in terms of people who would, you know, I guess if you were non-binary you would answer no, but it's a step forward at least to acknowledging that not everyone identifies with the sex that, you know, that they were assigned at birth. When answering it over 16 will be asked what their sexual orientation is for the first time, which is really interesting. And I know why people might be reticent to answer, because I know lots of queer people feel like, is this going to be recorded, and is this going to, you know, if things get worse, we are living in a progressively more intolerant society, how will that information be used against me? I know people certainly haven't declared it to their doctor in the past, and yet it's been on their medical files when they've requested them. And then you're like, what does that mean in terms of my treatment, and how and not just in terms of medical treatment, and how people are treating me and how I'm prioritized, because you can't screen for homophobia in the staff in your, you know, doctor surgery or whatever. The conversation I've seen around in terms of LGBTQ plus conversations is that, like, fill it in, because if it shows that like X amount of the population, you know, are gay or bisexual, they will have to give financial provision to that there'll be more money made available. If we have a clear representation of what is you know, like what the needs are, how many people there are, how much provision we need to make, then they're more likely to prioritize money, is the logic and is the hope for that.
I've seen some interesting people tweet about when they've completed their census, on the flip side of that, like a point of pride to say, I've ticked on the census, I'm homosexual, I'm not sure what the categories are, bisexual, and they've said it's made me feel really proud and empowered for the first time, which is really nice as well, because, you know, it might almost feel like they're saying it out to no one, but to themselves, they're affirming it to them. So that's kind of a really positive, you know, a positive affirmation, I guess, a nice thing that comes out of it.
There's a part of the census which talks about language, and it says, it asks you if you are a Welsh speaker, and then it takes you through to like another page where that's broken down into 4 things, which is, do you understand it, do you speak it, do you read it, do you write it? So I was like, oh, that's interesting, that'll give us a really good indication you know, about what the state of the nation is in many ways, and also it'll give us a really good update of where we are in 2021, moving towards the target of 1 million Welsh speakers in 2030. However, having read around it a bit more, because I asked my tutor, my Welsh tutor, what should I fill in, because I can understand it, I can get by speaking it, because it's phonetic, I can write anything I can speak, I can write, and reading is fine, although I would always opt for English. And he was like, oh, I think you can say you know, you speak it and you, but then he came back and went, hold on a second, I've just read this article that I read on Nation Cymru that he sent over, that I sent to you, basically going tick every box, because for a few reasons. One is, there is not a bit on the form that says, can you read English, can you write English, which loads of people wouldn't be able to tick confidently, and loads of the people who would tick it confidently probably couldn't write or read English as well as the people who in Welsh wouldn't have the confidence to tick it. The Welsh people I know have this mythical collection of the perfect Welsh speaker in their head, and there's probably only 3 of them, and they're probably all in the Eisteddfod, and they speak this perfect Welsh, and so they all go, my Welsh isn't good enough, because they're comparing themselves to this person that doesn't exist, and it's really damaging, and it's really damaging on the census.
There's like an implied doubt in the question, isn't there? Like that, it's like the equivalent of someone who says, oh, you're in a bad mood, like I fucking am now, like, so it's almost like, but can you speak?
Yeah.
Can you read Welsh? Yeah, it's a real, yeah, it's a real psychological little trick. And if it isn't there for the English language census, it needs to be balanced a little bit more. But Welsh is like one of the oldest languages, like dates back to like medieval times, really. And so I think because it's fighting for this language, you kind of think that it's so traditional and stuck in this state, but actually Welsh will evolve just as much as English does. So there's not a perfect Welsh. We just don't have the comparisons to go, oh, this is like this influence or this, because we're trying to fight for something so traditional at the same time. It's a really weird parallel, I think.
And I probably run the risk of being offensive in my ignorance here, but like, I think the spoken Welsh is very modern as English. And then I think the preserves where written Welsh is used most is in like official documents, which by their nature, if you're taking those in English or Welsh, there's long, complicated words that aren't normally used. Well, just even look that like until 12 months ago, no one had heard the word furlough. It wasn't a word in common parlance. It's like a technical governmental word. So just like Shakespeare isn't evolving, except when people do like Gwenny adaptations, when they're like, Shakespeare's a bit like rap.
Thinks. Oh.
But of course, like traditional Welsh bardic stuff won't, the stuff that already exists, and it won't, it will tell of its time, but it's not going to evolve. Just like we're not putting the pressure on English text to evolve, but the language is evolving and is, modern and it's changing all the time and really dynamic as a language.
I would never think of anything like that so subtle within a census. Like, you just think you're ticking these things, but what does it mean? What does it say about you? And a little bit the conspiracy theorist in me is like, what do they do with it? Like, I know I understand the idea that they're counting the population, and I think that's really interesting to see the changes and how like the population's grown through this decade, or we can identify trends and patterns. I think all of that's pretty cool, but then some of it you're just like, what do they do with that? But it would be nice to have a bit more information about that and why you're doing it, something that's accessible and not just like this massive document. Why you're asking me this?
Totally understand why people are cynical and reticent, because we're like, well, they're not necessarily a trustworthy bunch, are they? History tells us that, like the newspapers today tell us that. So I understand people's reticence, and I think it's really good that in Welsh activism the conversation is happening very quickly about don't let them think that you don't have ownership of the language. So yeah, I think I'm ticking all the boxes.
But one of the really interesting things in that article is it talks about funding and why underselling the Welsh language, or how many Welsh speakers there actually are, can have a correlation and an impact on where funding goes to kind of support that and raise the numbers of Welsh speakers. What areas do they need to target? What areas of Wales are struggling to kind of raise the number of speakers? So it's important to kind of celebrate and do it to get those infrastructures in place. And I also think I could quite confidently say, and maybe this is an arrogance, but I think my reading and writing ability in Welsh is much better than my speaking.
Really?
But I'm going to tick them all. I'm going to join you. Maybe you feel like you're having a repetitive conversation because you notice it so much more in another language because you've learned that sentence, so you're more conscious of it. But in English, you probably don't really kind of have varied conversations anyway, so you probably use the same sentences as well.
Well, for instance, when I was chatting to you then, I was trying to say something in Welsh. I was like, efo, pobl, and then or something like that. And I went to say efo again. I went, oh, you've already used that word. And I was like, yeah, and I would use with in a sentence, like, do you know what I mean? Multiple times in English. And I wouldn't be like, can't do that. So like this weird thing of like, we have to lay out all the words we've used. Like it's a tabletop magic trick is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not fucking Scrabble, is it? Just... Anyway, mae'n document pwysig dros y byd I dangos newid yn y population, I deall sut mae pawb yn wneud yn y Gogledd Cymru yn y Cymru de. Ach mae'n political hefyd, achos ti'n medru studio documents i deall mwy amdan hanes. A mae'n diddorol i dysgu amdan y census ar ôl y war, achos dwi'n diddorol i dysgu sut mae population yn newid ar ôl y hon.
Yeah.
Os dwi'n make sense.
You said it's an important document that that shows us changes over the years, and you said all over the world as well. And then you said, so you know, like what's happening, how people are in the north of Wales and the south of Wales. And then you said people can look at it and learn about the history from the time. And then you said something about newid, so it's about changes. And then I've forgotten, but your last sentence. So I'm so sorry.
No, Kiri, I was basically Billy bullshitting to try and make something. Oh, mae'n y pwnc sych, mae'n anodd i wax lyrical amdano fo. Mae'n drwg gen i. Sorry.
Wrth y môr efo box. Okay. Ti isio gair newydd?
Dwi'n angen gair newydd, please.
Cyfrifiad.
Cyfrifiad.
Cyfrifiad, yeah. Census.
Oh, iawn, okay. Cyfrifiad. Fel cyfrifiadur ydy computer.
Cyfrifiadur. But yeah, so it's maybe it's roots in the same thing. Cyfrifiad. Cyfrifiad ydy bwysig iawn. Achos rwan mae gen i golygfa dda o Cymru a dyfodol o y iaith, achos rwan y cyfrifiad y gofyn ti'n dall Cymraeg, ti'n siarad Cymraeg, ti'n sgwennu Cymraeg a ti'n darllen Cymraeg. A pobl, dwi isio pobl i tic pob bocs i dangos y byd Cymru ydy what's I want to say, like Cymraeg ydy y iaith o y gwlad eto. A dwi ddim isio gweld 4 gwestiwn am y cyfrifiad eto, achos dim 4 gwestiwn. Ti'n siarad Saesneg? Okay, ti'n dall Saesneg, ti'n sgwennu Saesneg, like 1 gwestiwn. Ti'n siarad Saesneg, a mae'n digon. Dwi'n meddwl mae'n ddiddorol achos rwan pobl hoio medra tick a box i dweud dwi'n hoio neu bisexual, neu arall. A mae'n ddiddorol iawn achos pobl sy'n byw yn y adre efo pobl sy'n ddim yn gwybod their sexual orientation, cael link private ar-lein i access y cyfrifiad, felly pobl medra dweud dwi'n hoio a ddim yn poeni pobl yn y adre. Be ti'n, like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's, I'm SAFL? Yeah, safety, is it SAFL?
Safle. Ydy safle?
Safle. I'm going to give it a Google. Ddiogel as well.
Diogel. Yeah, safe. Yeah.
So one day I know I will have made it when it comes to speaking Welsh, because ti'n gwybod ti'n defnyddio? Yeah, ATM, ATM dweud, tisio English neu Cymraeg, a dwi'n wastad clic Saesneg, ond un dydd dwi'n presio button am Cymraeg, and that's when I know I've made it as a Welsh speaker.
Well, I tell you what I'm doing after this, filling my fucking census in, not getting that fine.
Yeah, I'm going to do it.
Probably will somehow.
I'm going to do it.
Do you know what bridge always gets me, even when I've never fucking driven on it? The new Runcorn Bridge. I'm always getting fined for that.
There's someone with your plates whiz around Widnes, just piling up fines for you.
I love the way you said Widnes then. It sounds a bit more exotic.
Yeah, where do I summer? In Widnes.
You wouldn't.